So you've started a business and it's doing really well. And you have these visions of growing the business and really taking it to the next level and the next level, and maybe even making 300,000, $500,000, $1 million business. So you start to scale your business and pretty soon you realize it's not what you thought. Hey, Badass Business Owners, my name is Tammy and I'm here to help you grow your business, but more importantly, grow those profits. I had a couple really good conversations this week and it really got me thinking that it's a conversation that we probably should have here on the show. And what that is there's so many times that we really feel the need to grow our business. So we start our business, we're usually by ourselves. Maybe you have a buddy or somebody that you're doing it with, but you start the business and it's getting better and better and you're making some pretty good money and you think, oh, you know what? I can make even more money if I added somebody. So you go from solo and the next thing you know, there's you and somebody else. And then it keeps doing better and you're like, oh, you know what? I think we can make even more money. So we hire another person and then another person. And sometimes that might be 4 or 5 or even 10 different people that we hire. Only the difference is now we're starting to realize that all that money that was pouring in or that we thought was pouring in before really isn't happening now. And we're actually working more and more hours. We're working longer days. And yeah, we've made a little bit more money, but nothing like we thought. Sales look great. Okay. When we look at what our net sales are and how much money we're bringing in with our sales, it looks and feels fantastic. But our bank account, not so much. And it's like, wow, how can I do 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, $500,000, and yet I don't have that much money? You know, I've seen people who do $9, $10 million, and at the end of the day, they're lucky if they get $100,000, $200,000 out of it all. It's crazy. It's insanity. But here's what happens. When we grow our business, we don't run the numbers first. We just see dollar signs because we're thinking, hey, if I can do 100 grand on my own, and if I was to double that, I'd make 200 grand. But what happens is we forget that some things just don't grow the same way. Because part of what happens along the way with our growth is we start spending more money, for example, on advertising. Before, you were doing it word of mouth, maybe a small little budget, but now advertising costs have gone up. And a lot of people don't understand that if you want to make money off of your advertising, you need to kind of figure out what you need to have in return. So if you spend $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 on advertising, most people think, oh, once I do that $2,000, $3,000 worth of sales, all of a sudden, I've made my money back. No, you haven't, because if you have a 20% bottom line, you have to do 5 times that amount in sales just to break even. Then you start making money. So if you're spending $5,000 with a 20% bottom line, your first $25,000 of additional sales is just to pay for the advertising, to get back to where your profit was before. But that's just one thing. The other thing that happens is in the beginning, you are the one who is doing a lot of the work. And since we've already talked about the fact that as a business owner, you get paid 2 ways in your business. The first way is as an employee in your business, and the second way is as the business owner. Well, when you start to scale and you start to bring on people, you're not the one who's making the money as the quote unquote employee. Other people are. So that is coming off of your bottom line, where before it probably wasn't, because you didn't calculate that in to how that would dig into those profits that you have. And having employees comes with additional costs on top of that in a lot of cases, because you're not only paying their wage, you're paying the taxes on top of them. If you happen to do insurance or anything else, that's paying on there. Some of you have to get additional trucks, you have to get additional equipment. So costs go up with you having more employees. The other thing that goes up are other operational costs. Some of your operational costs will stay the same. If you have a loan, for example, let's say you're renting out a building. That building's cost is going to be the same whether you have 2 people or you have 20 people. That part might be true, but your insurance in many cases go up. And some of you guys pay some crazy insurance with what goes on there. Like we already talked about, small tools in different if you have run trucks and stuff like that, you might have fuel, whatever the case may be. There's going to be other operational costs that will go up in relation to you having more people and doing more business. Some things will stay the same, but other costs will go up. We already talked about advertising, for example, being one of those things. So you end up spending a lot more money. There's a reason why when you see a lot of those well-named brands out there and they got the fancy trucks and everything else, the reason they come in so much higher on the bids than most people is because they've got an overhead that they have to pay, because they're not operating at that 20-30% profit that you were working at when you were onesie twosies in your business. No, what they're doing is they're turning around working at 10% and they're charging even more. And that's the only way they can get the 10% that they've got in some cases. So the main thing that I want to talk about is the fact that two parts to it. One is do your numbers, run the numbers, make sure you understand growth comes at a price. And are you willing to, some cases, make less money? If you're fine with going from a 30% profit down to 10 because you're going to make more dollars, then that's fine. But you've got to make sure that you're realistic on what it is that you're going to make when you start scaling. Growth comes at a price, because if you don't like being in charge of people, you are going to be constantly hiring in some cases, depending upon the type of business that you have and the turnover that you have. You're going to constantly be training and developing. You're going to constantly be doing so many different things because of the people that you have. You're also going to get away from doing a lot of the work yourself, even though you're for some people, they don't. They have all these people and they're doing all the work and they're trying to grow their people. So they actually end up working a lot more hours because they've never realized how to financially replace themselves in the business, or how to step out and become more of a leader of the business through growth. And they end up working these crazy long hours. And now they've kind of ticked off the people at home because they're working so many more hours and the family's not seeing the benefits of this financial boom that everybody thought they were going to get. Because like I said, in most cases, they're not getting that. Okay. The other thing that happens is we kind of get into this catch-22. For you youngins out there, that's an old book, but basically it's like you're screwed either way, right? Because in some cases, what happens is if you don't do it, your sales are going to go down. But if you do it, your sales go up, but your profits go up a little bit, but you're still not making money. Then what happens is our ego gets in the way, because there comes a point for most people when they get into this situation where they decide that, you know what, I'd rather go back to just me and someone else. I can't tell you how many times somebody has told me that they'd rather go back to the beginning when it was just them and one other person. And like I said, I had this conversation twice last week with two different people, and I've had this multiple times in the past with folks. And you might be familiar with it. Sometimes you'll probably have said this to yourself, or you've even said, I might as well go back to a 9-to-5 job or some other job because then I'd have more money and more time on my hands. Same thing, okay? Because what happens is that overwhelmingness of trying to run this business with multiple people and having all these other responsibilities just becomes this point of, why am I doing this, right? And what happens is most people don't want to not do it because of our ego. Our ego gets in the way because we feel as if we failed somehow. It's no different than when we've had conversations about people that need to take a step back and they feel like, hey, I failed at my business. It doesn't mean you failed at your business. It means that you have come to the realization that the growth isn't for you, that you aren't satisfied with working crazy tons of hours and not getting paid. You know, there are people out there that are 3, 4, 5, 10 years into their business and they're still not getting paid. You know, I get that people sit there and say, oh, you need to just work your butt off for free and just keep reinvesting back in the business and growing it and all this. You know what? At the end of the day, if you don't need money to live, sure, do that. But I think there comes a point in time that if you say for the next 6 months, 8 months, 1 year, I'm going to invest everything back in the business and I had the financial means to be able to survive, great, do it if you want, but put a hard deadline that you will get paid by a certain time. And some of these people have given up their money for their family, for their situation, for their future, in hopes of growing the business. And there's always a tomorrow, right? I'm going to give up my pay so I can hire this next person. And then it comes around, hey, I'm going to keep giving it up so I can hire this next person. Because at some point, if I grow big enough, I'm going to make enough money that I can start getting paid. But now we're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the road and still not getting paid. Growth is not for everyone. And it doesn't mean that you aren't succeeding. I know a lot of people that are one-man bands and women, or just them and someone else, and they're making tons of money and they're not working these crazy hours and they're not having to have the stress of having other people's livelihoods on them. Trust me, I've been there. Okay. When I had a business that was scraping by, and I kept thinking about, the livelihood of the people that I had. I had another one that, I couldn't let those people become homeless. And it's just one of those things where it drives you because you want to provide them with great whatever it is. But at the end of the day, you have to survive first. You have to make sure that your family is taken care of and that you're taken care of. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but I know there's people out there that need to hear this, and they need to take a step back. Growth is not for everyone. That does not mean you're bad at what you do. It does not mean that you're failing. It just means that you're making a decision based off of the life that you want to have. Because at the end of the day, you kind of have to start at the end game and then say, can I financially make this work to get to that end game? Because if your ultimate goal is to work 30 hours a week and make bank, you're going to do that one of two ways, right? If you're by yourself, you can figure out how to make the bank that you want to make with working those hours, or you do have to scale to a certain point, and then you can go ahead and make that money. But part of what happens is if you never pull yourself out of the business and you never get into a leadership role in the business, you're never going to get to those 30 hours and make that bank, because you're never focused on being profitable. You're never focused on hiring the right people, training and developing them, because your feet are always in the business. And when your feet are always in the business, you never can work on the things that you need to be able to get yourself into a position where you're only working 30 hours a week and you're making bank. You have to be the ringleader of your business, not the person in your business. And that's part of the challenge that a lot of people get into with that growth. Is they're constantly having to replace people. They're constantly chasing their tail. They're constantly having to run back and forth through all these different things. And it's because they're never focused on the business and how to make the business better and how to make the business more profitable. So growth isn't for everybody. And I need you to really look in the mirror and ask yourself, is this really what I want? If it's not, scale back. No harm, no foul, nothing against you. Just make a business that fits the lifestyle and the money that you're wanting. If you want to grow some badass business that is making tons of money and you've got all these employees and everything else, great, do that too. But make sure you're looking at the numbers and you're working on the business and constantly tweaking and fine tuning. So that way you are getting paid, you're making sure your employees are getting paid, that you're hiring the best people, that you're training and developing them, that when you spend $4,000 on advertising, that you're going to make $16,000 to break even, but you're going to make even more to be able to pay for that. And you can only do that if you're crunching those numbers and you're looking and have a plan of what you need to do. Because especially advertising, so I bring it up. So many people want to throw $1,000, $2,000, $5,000. I don't care what that number is, but you need to know what the plan is on how you're going to break even on it, and then how are you going to make more money. That's just one example of things that we do. If you hire a person, how much do your sales need to go up to be able to pay for that person? And then how do you make sure that you hire the right person, that you train in developing them? The key to all of this is if you want to scale your business, you must be working on the business, not in it. And you need to make sure that part of that scaling is that you're getting paid and that you figure out what does the business need to do so that you can continue to get paid. Because what's going to happen is you will continue to work in the business so you can at least try to survive, right? And then what's going to happen is you're just building a deck of cards that keep falling down, and you keep building it up and then fall down, and then you keep building it back up, because you're constantly having to chase yourself. And I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff out here, but my main point in this is not everybody really wants to scale. We want to scale because it's sexy. Having those $500,000, $1 million businesses, that sounds really cool. But at the end of the day, I can't tell you how many people are out there that you see that look like they're doing $1 million business and they're broke. Okay? They're very broke. They're not making money. On the outside, they might look successful, but they're really not. And they're miserable with them running their business because they're busting their tail and they're not making the money that they thought they were going to make. Sure, they might be making a little bit more money, but it's definitely not the money that they thought that they had visioned that they were going to make. And a lot of them aren't making anything because they, like I said, the business and all the people have to get paid first. And when payroll's done, all the money in the checking account is gone and they don't get any of it. And that's what tends to happen with a lot of these businesses when they're trying to scale. So please use the numbers. The numbers are going to tell you how fast to grow. The numbers are going to tell you if you can afford it. The numbers are what give you the opportunity to scale that business to $500,000, $1 million, and to be profitable. You've got to know your business numbers so you make smart decisions. So it really comes down to two parts: knowing your numbers, making smart decisions, and realizing you have to become the leader of that business. You can no longer be the technician working in that business to the degree that you have been. You must figure out, how are you going to get paid to grow and scale your business? If you want to go without a paycheck for 9 months, a year, fine. But stop going without a paycheck for 7, 10 years, thinking you're going to build something that one day you're going to make tons of money. At some point, there comes this thing where you're like, this isn't working. I need to scale backwards. I need to get smaller. Maybe you can come back later, but for now, you need to get smaller so you can get some money. All right. With that, I'm going to stop rattling on this thing. But if you have any questions, put them in the comments below, like always. And with that, I'm out of here, and I will talk to you next week. Bye for now.